Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this important panel. I'm going to read the title to you. Social Sustainability, How Can Film Schools Become More Diverse and Accessible in a Sustainable Way? We are very, very happy as FILMSCHOOLFEST Munich to have this panel and to welcome all of you here. Dee from London, Jakob from Copenhagen, Fatih from Berlin, and then, of course, Aida, our moderator from Hamburg. This is a topic that is very dear to our heart, and we are also currently organizing an entire conference on this topic, which will be happening from November 28th to the 30th at the Evangelische Akademie Tutzing. And this is a little bit of our prologue to the entire conference and our international approach to the topic, because we want to focus on talent, on young filmmakers, and on film schools and what they are doing in this field. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Aida, for hosting this panel for us.
Am I on? Thank you. From my point of view, it sounds the same. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the organizers of the Film Fest who have been taking amazing care of us. My name is Aida Begović. I'm a sociologist, and I've been working in diversity consulting in the arts and culture sector for about 7 years, focusing on issues of racism and classism. Also writing on these issues, and I'm very happy I get to moderate this interesting panel today, and also that I got to be included in the jury of this film fest. I will start with my colleagues joining me from my left, your right. We have Fatih Abay. Fatih Abay is the Diversity and Inclusion Officer of the European Film Academy. Fatih trained as a cultural anthropologist, and his focus was on migration, diversity, racism, gender, critical theory, and post-colonial studies. Before joining the European Film Academy, he worked for an anti-racism NGO in Germany with a focus on political advocacy. And this event was actually created in cooperation with the European Film Academy, which is known for awarding the European Film Award and representing European film and its industries. Thank you for joining us. And to my other side, we have Kerai. Dee has a wide range of industry experience of forging EDI best practice and creating authentic editorial storytelling, having worked in productions within Sky, Warner Brothers, and now with the London Film School as senior culture and EDI manager. Their directed approach has developed and been integral to changing industry attitudes, culture, and practice. They specialize in making the uncomfortable comfortable. Thank you for joining us, Dee. And now we have Jakob Høgel, who is going to have to help me with introduction because some of those are on my other notes. But Jakob, you are the head of education and research at the National Film School in Denmark, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Just recently started at the film school. My background is in visual anthropology and being in the film industry as a producer, but also as a film commissioner, so also financing and head of a talent scheme at the Danish Film Institute.
And Jakob has joined us yesterday from Madrid with a very long train ride, so thank you for making the trip.
Thank God you can sleep on trains, otherwise I wouldn't be awake now.
When we were sitting in the lounge just before this talk, we realized that we're all fairly new in the positions that we're working in right now. And Dee, you said something very interesting. You said when you joined the film school, in a way, you ripped it apart. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
So one, thank you for having me. It's I'm very honoured to be here. When I joined the film school, it was an interesting dynamic because I heard a lot of gossip, I think is probably fair to say, you know, of how things were and how they weren't doing. So what I decided to do when I joined the school within the first 3 months is I did a full audit of people's experiences, students' experiences, staffing, what do policies look like, what does progression look like, and also the kind of data that they collect, which was very, very minimal. And as we're constricted because of HESA, which is the Higher Education Board in the UK, they only collect very generic information, and I quite like specific data because I think it's easier to kind of track and manage. And whilst I was there during the 3 months, I did a lot of what I call trauma listening. And so that means meeting up with individuals and kind of helping them process what their experiences have been like within the school and the organisation. And so what I did is I collected all of that information and then shared it back with the school. It was a very uncomfortable situation for a lot of people because obviously I didn't name anybody, but I kind of said X, Y, and Z happened or is still happening. How do we start to rectify that? And then what I did is I introduced 10 expected behaviours from all staff members and all students. And I made a very harsh rule of going, anybody who stands outside of these behaviours, we will start going into formal processes so that there are consequences and accountability that are always involved in kind of people who are particularly marginalised or don't feel that they're being seen or acknowledged. And that's kind of continued on as I've kind of been there. It's been a real whirlwind, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been very uncomfortable, which is something that I probably take too much pleasure in, because I had to almost condition myself to realise the work that I want to do is not easy. So if I'm not able to kind of embrace that uncomfortableness, I don't feel like I can be effective. And so whilst I've been doing that, you know, I've cried, I've broken down, I've upped my therapy sessions to make sure that I can look after myself as well as looking after my students and staff. And we've seen such a big cultural change within the year that I've been there because people are now starting to feel validated and acknowledged, and they know that we've got a long way to go, but they're finally starting to see things that are shifting, particularly when there were issues around staffing and their kind of behaviours. They weren't being picked up or they weren't being accountable. And since I've come in, I've ensured that anything that comes across my computer or my desk, I will address it and I will deal with it.
So I think this is an issue in a lot of schools, not only film schools, that staff and especially students are experiencing discrimination by teachers, and in some cases also reporting. So it's definitely happening, and in some cases it is also being reported, but there is a lack of accountability. So it just keeps repeating and repeating in every semester with new people. What does accountability look like?
So I look a lot, particularly at policies, which is not fun work, but I make sure that I read every single policy that the school has, and I look at where I believe it's not fair to people from lower demographics. So does it speak to people of colour? Does it speak to the LGBT community? Is it fair to people who are neurodiverse or have a disability? So therefore, you know, one of the issues that we have in our school is accessibility. You know, we don't have lifts, and I think that's horrendous to have as a school where we can't allow people who need wheelchair access in. So that's something that I've kind of been working on and creating solutions on. But the accountability is never easy because it means that people need to put a mirror up to themselves, and I include myself in that. I wish I knew everything, but I don't. So I will make mistakes, but I'm willing to try.
Okay, let me give you a concrete example. For example, what if we have a professor that knowingly ignores students' pronouns? So misgenders students and is actually being called out on it by students, but just continues doing that. So
what I've done at the school is I've built it into the policy. You know, one of the big factors that I always say is you don't have to agree and you don't necessarily have to like it. However, what we're trying to do is create an inclusive, respectful situation. So what I say with a lot of my staff members is kind of going, if I was to call you, if their name's Andrew, for example, I'll say, I'll call you Bob. Do you like it? And they're like, no, I don't like that because my name's, and I say the same principle lies for pronouns. And if they continuously do it and I get reports for it, they will be put into disciplinaries and then they will be made accountable for it. Whereas I think before my arrival, they weren't.
Can I ask, what policy has this been like included in?
So I created my own policy in terms of diversity and inclusion, and we talked about kind of code of conduct and respectable behaviours. So I went through the school's code of conduct, which was very thorough, but again, there was no consequence or action to it. So what I did is kind of going, once it's reported and it's on my desk, then I'll make sure that I will take it to the right level. I will work with the HR systems. I will work with the then CEO to kind of go, this is a repeated offence. Now we need to escalate it to a formal process. And I built that in within the school's structure of kind of going, if it continuously happens, there's no informal process. It goes straight to formal, because I think it's disrespectful to not feel seen or acknowledged when you're not asking for a lot of difference. You're just asking to be seen and made to feel aware, and I think we all kind of eager and want that. And to outrightly go against that because you don't believe in it, it feels like, for me, that doesn't work within the school's values. And I think when we're going against the values of what we're trying to do as a school, then there needs to be that accountability towards it.
And I mean, the subject we're focusing on today is also diversity and sustainability. And I think this can be a good example where, of course, a school will say our values are focused on diversity and we will not accept any kind of discrimination. But this is where it becomes sustainable to not just have those values on a website maybe, but also bring it deeper into the system and into the lived realities of the people in the school. Jakob, maybe you can share a little bit of how values are handled within your school.
Yeah, I would say I don't think we are nearly where the UK is in terms of values. There's still a longer discussion going back and forth in terms of is diversity even a thing we should be concerned with. But more specifically at our school, I think when I started half a year ago, we felt that there was an issue with diversity, and I think the place where schools have the most power is in terms of admission. We see ourselves as an elite school. We only take in every second year very few students, but they become the main part of the industry. So we have that responsibility to see where should the industry go from here. And we didn't have time to make enormous changes. I think we should do that in the future, but we made 2 major changes in the admission this year, or 3 actually. One was, apart from the normal criteria about talent that you could probably find anywhere, we put a 4th criteria called curiosity about your own society. That changed a lot, because there's a tendency you fix on ideals of who is an artist. And this is maybe a bit too crude said, but there's a particular male, sometimes in excess type, who seems like a real artist, and the whole dogma wave of Denmark was part of that. Whereas the curious factor, if you actually start looking for that with the applicants, something happens. So that's one thing. Another thing is that you always want motivation, but people from high resource background, they can easily sit and say, my artistic ambition is blah, 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 blah. People who are not from that kind of background, they don't speak like that. They cannot even answer that question. But if you do tests, as we do, 3 full days on the ground, and you ask them, so what are you doing now, and could you have done that differently? They can easily answer, and you can have a real discussion of who has talent. So that was the second thing we did. How is it we're talking about things inside the admission process? And then the third thing we did was we found out from statistics that quite a lot of people are considering whether they should even apply for the school. There's a huge group of people just, should I do it, should I not? And of course, for many it's a question, am I good enough, and so on. Quite a lot of that is, am I right for the school? Will the school actually accept me for who I am? And in order to counter that, and should I show that, we made some videos.
Yes, please.
And we did some questionnaires and realized that actually a lot of people ended up applying where they were considering not applying. It's a very simple tool, but it actually worked. Thank you.
Thank you so much for showing the film. And where can the film be seen? Is it on the website of the school, or?
It is on the website now, but we did, I'm not the expert on this, but it actually went out to a lot of technical schools, a lot of, in social media was visible. And I think, 38% said that video, it's a series of videos with different diversity issues dealt with. that it was a huge reason for them applying. I mean, it seems so stupid that should be a barrier for people who have actually made films of 3, 4, 5 years, and they're still considering whether to apply or not. So we have to do way more of that. I think we also spoke about this, the kind of outreach, whether the schools should not be these kind of, in our case, national institutions located in Copenhagen, where people think it's a castle. Can I even get up the tower? We should be felt in the community in various parts of the country. And I think we've had great luck with this in terms of gender and ethnic diversity. I think our real challenge is socioeconomic and regional diversity. I think that has still not, we have to do much more work on that.
Yeah, you gave us an interesting keyword when you said the school considers itself an excellent school. So there's also this criteria, so this exclusivity. So it's actually meant to be exclusive in a way. And also these criteria of what is excellent. You also said when dealing with candidates, what is considered a good filmmaker, what is considered a good film, and so on. So it sounds like there's also a bit of a changing thought process on that. Is that correct?
Very much so. And I think we have to take on the responsibility. I know it's different in Germany. You have 6 and many other schools. In Denmark, it's one school, the National Film School. That just creates a lot of responsibility for what we're doing. And I think we have to take on the elite idea. We take 48 people in. We cannot avoid that elitism, but why not include diversity considerations as part of an elite thinking, instead of thinking we're powerless, it's for somebody else to do that. We should only look at talent in a very abstract way.
And so this is about, you were talking about the students questioning whether they would fit with the school or go well with the school, but also especially when it comes to like this socioeconomic background, I think there are a lot of students who don't even have this deliberation or don't have this questioning, but who never take into consideration the possibility of going into film. So I think that might also factor into that, which is why it's interesting to me that apparently you did such a widespread outreach where it could also
Yeah, I think we have some real issues. In the Danish Film School, people come in on average at age 26, which means that you have probably been working for 5, 6, 8 years, making films for free. And of course, in that, there's a huge social discrimination. People who have parents who they can finance this, and I don't know exactly how we're going to tackle this because otherwise the film school is free. It doesn't cost to apply for the school and so on. But the period before that is crucial.
Yeah, and to be 26 and able to go to school instead of work. Full time or something like that.
Yeah. Many young people would maybe be forced by their families to do something else. The family says, it's not a way of life to make films. And it is at the end of this, but how do you feed yourself for a number of years? So I think we have to also look at our requirements in terms of how many films you've made and so on, and lower that age.
Again, like this idea of excellence and what it means and who is allowed to participate in this idea of excellence. In the beginning, you alluded and said maybe we're not as far as you guys are in the UK. So this is something which I'm very thankful to the organizers of the film festival to bring us together and have this opportunity to see some things that have already come into reality, like your program in other places. Fatih, maybe can you give us some kind of image looking from our position here in Germany? Where are we within the European film schools?
I think in general, I would like to also kind of look more from the pan-European point of view. I mean, obviously, we as a European Film Academy, we are also very interested in data, and we see a lot of initiatives in various countries, also here in Germany, where actually data collection is done. But it's mostly about who is represented. And it would be maybe also interesting, actually, like coming actually to the example what Jakob also gave is basically who is not represented and why, like to find out really the real reasons why, for example, certain people from marginalized communities or positions are not applying to schools, or why it's not only about family and socioeconomic. I feel there's something else more, and this is mostly about what is also already funded and kind of produced in the film industries. I mean, even if you look on the British film, I mean, you did a lot with the BFI, you know, we also did now some diversity inclusion standards, and we are developing also our policies. And mostly we took also the UK as an example. But if I look also on the British film, which is still funded today, it's still like representing one group of people and not really everybody, and especially the marginalized. And if basically these examples are not kind of established from the peripheral to the center, or from the marginalized to the mainstream, so to say, then I feel like there's also this lack of motivation for people to apply. So that's why I think it's important also to kind of bridge the gap with funding institutes, and I think the film schools have a big power in that because they have the contacts, they have the networks, and in order also to kind of guide the graduate students not only until the festival where they maybe show their films under the umbrella, under the protection of the school, but also kind of guide them to the respective producers or decision makers in order to kind of also basically bring them more into the industry.
I was just going to say on that, I think you're right in the sense it's a lot about systemic mindset, and I think that plays a key factor. You know, we were speaking earlier, and I've been very fortunate to work in industry for around 15 years now. I know I look very young, thank you. But, you know, when I started working in production, everybody either assumed that I was a runner, which I wasn't. I was one of the head editorial people there, or I was finance or the IT person. And even with my own family, you know, that's not to say it's the people I worked with, they always kind of go, oh, you know, I work in TV. And they'd be like, oh, are you an engineer? And I was like, oh, God, no. You know, I work with content, I work with production, and that's what I love doing. And it was that kind of really shifted a lot for people, because we don't think about that representation and how much of a difference it makes. And, you know, you making the films, Jakob, like if there was ever an Asian British person on TV, whether the show was good or not, I would watch it. Just because it was so nice to see someone who looked a bit like me, or the people I know, formed out in the TV world or in the film world. And that's what really made a difference for me, because it was kind of going, now I can be that person for other people. And it is about having that representation in there, and it's not easy and it's very difficult, but it is very key to making people very aware of going, this is also an opportunity for you. You don't have to be constructed to what your parents might believe or what society might believe. There are options out there that will feed your creative energy.
Yeah, and also having like an environment that will support that, because a lot of the times, of course, people do come into situations that are discriminatory, that are hurtful, and then you can have all the motivation and creativity you want in the beginning. It's just a destructive environment. And this is again where it's so interesting, like what that not just diversity in sense of values, but of what we can do and change to really have an impact on people's lives, allowing them to do this work. And I would like to talk a bit about what it is that creates this impact, because oftentimes we have this contrast and divide where diversity actually becomes like an subject of frustration, where we only have it on this theoretical value level, and you have this experience where of being disappointed, or of even having interest in the subject yourself for whatever reason. And even an event like today, thank you for your trust for coming, and not feeling like, oh, another panel talk on diversity. Like, I wonder if this is worth 90 minutes of my life. and yeah, kind of like eroding trust. There was, when we're talking about numbers, there was a very interesting survey done with Concordia University in Canada, and they did a survey amongst staff and students, and especially with students, the majority of students stated that the university is has efforts in terms of diversity and anti-discrimination, but less than 1/3 of the students thought that that it was a strong commitment. And among the students who said that they had lived or experienced discrimination in the school, it was more than 50% who said they did not believe it was a real commitment to diversity and inclusion. Of course, that makes a disconnect. At that point, you can talk about diversity as much as you want. If the trust is gone, it's very difficult. So I think, what are some ways to create real impact to regain trust again?
I mean, I definitely look at every situation in terms of power and kind of advocates. I think I've been quite fortunate, particularly at the London Film School, where I have had a CEO who's now left, but I have a new CEO who's also kind of encouraging and allows me to do the room, and it gives me the room to do what I need to do. And I think diversity is it's been a topic that's been going on for almost at least 20 years. You know, people think it's a new fad, it's kind of super woke, and you know, these are things that just kind of make me kind of go, I don't understand why. But I have learned that a lot of that comes from defense. You know, people not wanting to release the power that they currently have. You know, we talked about, you know, I'm very outspoken. And it's got me into trouble quite a lot. But I think if I don't do that, I can't see the change happening. So, for example, at the London Film School, we have a thing called crits. So the students show their films. We get professionals in, directors, producers, etc. And they then give critiques where they're not allowed to respond back. And one of the films that I was in attendance to was around an LGBT relationship. And there was one particular line in it that for me was extremely impactful. But our critique basically said, I don't think that line is valid. I don't think it should have been in the film. I don't see what was the point of it. And that's not critique, that's opinion. So that needs to be also very clear. But I had to stand up because I was in the room and I just went, I don't think that that's acceptable. Whether you understand it or not, you shouldn't completely go, well, that shouldn't exist because you don't understand it. For me, as a queer person, I fully resonated with that one line. It really sung home to me, and I really felt that was something that in my heart and in my soul, I understood. So I understood what the filmmaker was trying to do. But no one had ever actually spoken up before. You know, no one had ever actually kind of gone, oh, should you really be giving critiques like that? And so again, I went, okay, fine. If this is how I built a complete structure of what does good criticism look like? How does that interact with each other? Because I think in order to create impact, you just have to challenge. And yes, sometimes we will get things wrong, but we need to use that as a learning opportunity to kind of make it better. The issues that I found around diversity inclusion is the risk factor. It either has to be extremely great and fantastic, or therefore it can't be anything else. Like any kind of process in any organization, it's trial and error. You know, we have to try to make things better. We don't have to stick to what we know, especially in this day and age. We've evolved so much in terms of mindset and beliefs, but we have to show, particularly for me, I have to show my students going, you have a voice, let me support your voice. And I think the more that we can do that, the more change that we'll see come into effect.
You were speaking about trial and error, and everybody is after these best practice. Maybe we should share the worst practice as well to like normalize this trial and error process and taking accountability, like proudly on your website. Here's the way we fucked up this year. Like
Absolutely.
So, but could you share some best practice from your school? Some things that have created this impact where you're like, okay, I don't only need to read it on the website. I can feel something actually changed.
So I do a lot of one-to-one work, particularly with my staff and students. I am only one person in the school who does this. But best practice is always a difficult thing because I think that can be interpreted in different ways. So what's best practice to me is probably not going to be the best practice for my staff. You know, they want to just get the film made. They want to make sure everything is done. Their journals are completely up to date. They're going to pass. That's their mindset of Whereas for me, best practice is kind of going, are you being open? You know, if you're being challenged by your student, and again, it comes down to that power structure. As a staff member, I have to be open to my students as well as my other tutors and lecturers. They need to be open to their students, not this is right or wrong. It's of, okay, I'm not sure I understand it. How do we open up that conversation? For me, that's what good practice is. Kind of not allowing things to be as black and white as we try to make them be, because that's part of the systemic structure. It has to be a certain way, otherwise it's not seen as good enough. And best practice for me is kind of going, it can be this way, it can be that way. I might not understand it, but is it a good film? You know, or do the people that are within the content feel reflected within society? You know, and I think, you know, we can go down the road of cliches and stereotypes, which can be extremely damaging, but they also have a use too, because that's how a lot of people have broken into industry, is kind of really pushing that stereotype of kind of going, well, this is what I believe X, Y, and Z are within that community. Now we are in a point, like I said, we've moved on a lot, going, we don't have to stick to that. We can be a lot more open. You know, as an Asian person, I get called a very derogatory term because people don't think I'm Asian enough. You know, I don't know, I know my language fluently, I don't know how to read and write it, but then there's other sides of kind of going, wow, you're really weird and out there, and I'm like, well, why can't I be both? You know, that is what society should be. And everyone feels that I have to be defined in a straight way, which is why I love the uncomfortableness of it all. I think that uncomfortableness is what helps us break through it, because we need to be uncomfortable. It's not a nice process.
The question for me is, what happens with this uncomfortableness? Can you help? Uncomfortable. What you said. And an issue that I've encountered in universities and schools, not only in film schools, is when I come in as a consultant and I make an analysis and I start making suggestions and so on, and in change there's always blocks. Every person has experienced that within themselves. If a change is happening, you can run into blocks. And one block that I'm very surprised by is professors feeling uncomfortable. That I'm talking to a director, for example, and I say, oh, we have to change this or that. And that the answer is, we have professors that have been here for a very long time, and they feel uncomfortable with that, and they feel offended by that. They feel attacked by that, and then the discussion is done. All this analysis and everything else doesn't matter because of these personal feelings. And I found it to be a real block, that the discussion really ends there. So I would really like to hear what your experience on this is, because the uncomfortable is there, but it stops. So now there's an uncomfortable feeling, but it just stops any change from happening. So my question would be like, how do you have experience with that, and maybe also some ideas on how to blast through this block, preferably?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen that happen in a few cases. And right now at the school is very torn on the Gaza-Israel situation. And of course, one reaction is to kind of close down and say, we are here for the arts, as if the arts weren't about the rest of the world. So let's keep that out. So it is about staying with the trouble, as someone would say. How if we cannot do that within ideal institutions, how would it ever be possible outside ideal institutions? And I think, I mean, so people close down on certain discussions, and they draw the artistic freedom card at certain times and not at others. There are other discussions they love. So it's about bringing in, aren't you open to all these other discussions? Yes, I am, but this one just doesn't seem artistic to me for some reason. Then trying to show that there's not any real difference between those two discussions. Does it make sense? That we should have that openness to all kinds of discussions, because that is what will fuel the art. And I think one thing I have learned is that with people who have difficulties with the diversity discussion, and when it becomes very kind of tagged on single persons, which I can kind of understand, I think it's important to open it up, saying this is not about statistics of people, or at least that's not the main goal of this. The main goal of this is that we will have a flourishing film culture where films are about many subjects, where you don't have to make a film about Pakistan because you have a Pakistani background or things like that. It's about also asserting film cinema as a strong cultural influence. That I haven't met a person who didn't understand that argument. And then it's a question of how far do you want to go towards the single person? That's where the issues start arising.
Yeah, I think because I'm very in contact with a lot of diversity trainers, also for the industry, but also on the topic on diversity inclusion. And I see it also with institutions, but also in our institution as well. I mean, is it just my colleagues, or even our board? I mean, you have also then this kind of uncomfortableness, or even like also in the industry, you can really see, oh, I feel controlled, right? So I feel dictated. And I feel like, especially these diversity trainings, they always go in a very pedagogical way, again, to teach them. And I feel then there's this blocking, what you just mentioned. And I feel especially in our institution, I mean, I'm developing now also like how we can communicate and talk about diversity inclusion in a terminology which is still like understandable to everybody. Obviously, we work in English, but if I use even in the race ethnicity context certain words, I cannot use it in certain countries. So because they are translating it illegally, because diversity inclusion, even if it's a global topic, I feel especially in the European film landscape, it's very localized. So even if it's taken global, but it's very localized, so everybody is still translating it into its domestic understanding. And if I take the word race, for example, in Germany or in France, there's no further discussion. So you have to find also ways how to communicate about this, and to maybe also develop certain tools in order to also talk with people. Obviously, people who are marginalized talk mostly about their experience, their emotionalness. But I think it's also interesting to understand why somebody who is in a main position, coming from a mainstream position, thinks like this. I mean, this person would not deny that this person is diverse, isn't diverse. So this person would say, I'm diverse anyway, but to understand also maybe how this person is was confronted. So a lot of trainings lately I look on is also more, it takes more time for sure, but it's more the autobiographic kind of narrative, where also certain narratives can be then changed again, but just to understand also more this autobiographic experiences of diversity.
Okay, so we have understanding. But what do you say? What do we do in those cases where uncomfortableness and power come together, where someone goes, I'm uncomfortable and I have the power to shut this down?
I mean, I think I don't take a very kind approach to these things. I think, if I'm being bluntly honest, because diversity is always an interesting topic, but diversity is all of us. You know, there is no one that isn't included in that subject. When people kind of go, oh, you need more diverse films, I kind of go, what does that mean? And I think particularly when we're talking about majority populations, in the UK, I can kind of speak of having a majority white male in our industry. I still include them. That you are still part of the diversity makeup. That is absolutely vitally important. But I think it then comes down to values and what is our organizational mindsets, particularly when it comes to those power and kind of balance elements, because I think I always want to work with people to make it better. Now, if you don't want to work with me, that's a different conversation that we need to have, because I think I want you to be better at what you're doing. I also want to be better at what I'm doing. So we have to kind of ride that uncomfortability in order to break through it. And I think when we put those kind of values and consequence in the line, that's when people either start to shift or they don't shift, because I think when we look at majority mindset, it's always played in their favor. So they have the power to shut it down. What power do the students have? And I think that's something that needs to be thought about a lot more, because I now do assessments in terms of going, how open are these conversations? How much are you willing to be challenged? I can give you a very strange example. Is before I started at the school, they did an announcement for me and did a little bio, and I go by the pronouns he, him, and they, and them, but they decided to go just they, them. And I said, that's fine, I have no problem with that. Before my first day, there was a 2-page complaint about me before I'd even started in the school. And it was talking about going, we think that they have a personal agenda to come in, make everything gender neutral, etc. And, bless my CEO at the time, he was very upset. And I said, I'm fine. And he was like, well, how can you be? And I kind of go, because this is what I expect. But what I'm telling you is this is how we approach it. Now, you as the CEO, what do you want to do about this? Because you have the power, you have the responsibility, and you will set that standard of what is okay and what is not. And is this really what you want the London Film School to represent? And he was like, obviously, no, this is not what I want. So we worked together. We wrote a very good response. They were kind of saying that they were going to do a coup if I continued in the role. And I was like, wow, I've not even been here a day and you already want me out because of my pronouns. And that mindset is kind of going, I'm still willing to work with you. But if you're not, then again, there needs to be a consequence of accountability, because I'm grown. I've worked in the industry for a long time. I've dealt with a lot. But these students are here, they're fresh, they're excited. And if we're not empowering them to be themselves, then we have a duty of care to those people. We have a duty to make sure that they are feeling empowered and seen. And that's why I think I take a lot more of a harsher approach, because I'm willing to work with people. But if you're not, then I will build a system that makes you accountable for it.
Okay, so also changing the criteria in this case, for example, for staff or for teachers, not just for excellence in film and so on, but also what does it mean to be, what is our criteria for people working here, and broadening those criteria, because I think the idea is also that you're depriving the students of their right of education if there isn't the environment. And I've also known of students who have to leave the school because of some discriminatory reason. There's such massive conflict with a teacher that they end up leaving, where I'm like, wow, okay, we cannot wait for years for the people or the system to change, because people effectively then cannot study in the school. And so it's interesting. So now we've talked about individual people, because they can be so powerful in blocking change for the entire school, or also now, of course, for encouraging change if they have that power. But I would also like to talk about standards. When we're talking about making diversity and anti-discrimination sustainable, then it should not be dependent on one person. It should not be dependent on one person in a negative sense, but also not in a positive sense, that you started this job and then in 5 years you switch to something even better, hopefully, and then everything is leaving with you. So we have to establish these standards. And also what I've seen is when standards are established, people don't discuss them as much. You don't bring them into the discussion. There's just a standard and then people follow it, like the schools all of them having Gleichstellungsbeauftragte. This is actually a standard that has been established by law. Now having Antidiskriminierungsbeauftragte is becoming a bit of a standard, and then you don't have to come into the school and be like, oh, it would be good if we had that. Everybody, it's like teenage peer pressure. Everybody else is doing it, and okay, we're also gonna do it. And I'm wondering, like, how can we push those standards and establish new standards, and maybe also on a collaborative level?
Can I, just one little example, because I think the question of curriculum is important here. And I think what one should avoid is saying diversity is a subject on its own, given, because then it'll be this battleground where some will say this is really important and some will say it's not important, and then you can not do anything except discuss with each other. One course we have at the school is devised by the photography department, where what used to be a purely technical course on lighting of faces now is called lighting and representation. So the course where they learn, I'm not sure, I mean, all kinds of things about shading and f-stops and so on, just includes a variety of faces and therefore real life problems. I mean, I was told that there was a road movie made with a black main character and a white main character driving in a car where they hadn't thought beforehand of the lighting issue. They ended up with the black guy having to put his face out the window because there were two f-stops different, and of course the whole film was devised over the white main character's face. This is of course an extreme example, but the idea that this comes into the main fabric of what we're teaching and not an extra subject that you can discuss whether it's relevant or not. I think that is, if we can achieve that on a wider scale, and it's very obvious to me when I talk to the photography students that they have a very different, I mean, it's a more ingrained, more question of how they actually do things and not an opinion thing when they talk diversity. So but how you do that on a bigger scale, because we're still dependent on single professors, and I think they should have a lot of room to do how they want to teach. So it's a long-term change.
Yeah, maybe I can ask, since you are the head of education, so the idea would be to not make diversity a separate issue, but to just have it be a criteria of good filmmaking, for example, or good lighting or whatever. It's not a separate thing. It's just like things have to be visible and have to be, like whatever basic criteria you would have for success in that area to have diversity be part of that. And now you have this one course that you described. If you want to make this a standard for your school, like what way would you have to do that? Or where would that have to happen to really make it a standard?
Yeah, because I do believe in a lot of, I would not make, I could, but I wouldn't do a top-down approach saying now all the rest of you have to copy this. I believe very much in the ingenuity of this one teacher. She has a Philippine background. And what actually happened on that course, sorry, I'm adding an extra detail, is that our students are generally completely uninterested in film history. To be honest, I know other schools teach it for a year. I mean, our students, when we tried that, they blocked the school and the head of the school was fired. So it has real life consequences. In this particular course, they got interested in film history. They wanted to understand, can that really be true? They actually watched a lot of way older films than they would ever have done. But so my answer to this, I'm new to the school, but is that the research possibility we have, and this is artistic research, not academic research, I will now give a grant to this one teacher, and through research, it can be built into other places maybe, but I want people to do it out of their own will and their own experimentation, because this made sense, lighting and representation. It may not make sense in a similar way in editing. I don't know. I don't think I should be the judge of that.
But okay, so one way to pinpoint that would be research funding.
Yeah.
Again, a question of criteria. So if you want funding for research, to include something like that in the criteria, for example.
Yeah.
I'm pushing for the standard. I'm going to find it.
I mean, I think we need a broader knowledge base at film schools. I don't know. We are a crafts and art school, and at least in Denmark, there's a very strong anti-academic urge, and I think we should be very different from academia, but we do need to base on some certain types of knowledge, and we have to strengthen that.
But I think also, even if we have standards, and I mean we are developing also our own standards now at the European Film Academy. We did. I feel even in the industry, the unconscious or even conscious bias, I would even frame it that way, still exists, because if we look also this year, the European film on our selection, we have very strong films on topics like queer representation, gender identity, transgender. but also refugees. But it's also mostly from the white gaze, and it's mostly an established filmmaker. And still, like, if you look also on the festivals, I mean, they award this because they find it courageous, right? So still, and they maybe also follow certain standards of representation, even if they may be in their institutions also who ask for standards. Please give in a questionnaire already a checklist. How is your film kind of diverse? And certain films tick the box. I mean, and there are also very strong films this year. But I feel still the gaze and the storytelling is very much not, it's very conventional in a way. And it's still like affirm again, actually then the key decision makers, oh yeah, okay, this filmmaker went for this very kind of courageous story. We applaud this person, which is also nice, and it's political. And I mean, I also think this year we have very strong films in that, but still, it's still like going again in the same kind of narrative. So I feel even if we have the standards, we have to establish something where a narrative change has to be kind of standardized in a different way. I don't know still what, but also to see that these stories are told in a very unconventional way, and maybe also in a way where actually then really black filmmakers or queer filmmakers even have really their stories told, and not again a cisgender white male person, for example.
Yeah, maybe we can introduce a term real quick. You mentioned the wide gaze, and I think this idea of the gaze is so relevant to storytelling and filmmaking, which would mean that even if I, as a Muslim woman, would make a film about one of something, my experience or from my perspective or something, or that for me, because I've only seen myself a Muslim character in a way that it is told to non-Muslim white people. And so that would be the white gaze, me making a movie, but having a white person in mind as my audience. So I'm taking a detour. It's my story, but I'm not telling it from here. I'm first bringing it here through imaginary white perspective. And we have this for a lot of things, also the male gaze. Cis-normative, cis-heteronormative perspective and something like that. So there are some standards in a way that we're really not that aware of yet, and that affect all of us.
I think those standards need to be embedded rather than be separate, as you were saying. You know, they need to, I think particularly around queer content or people who are marginalized, it has to be traumatic. And that's the only way it will get commissioned or get funded. And, you know, as much as that has kind of had its course, you know, I was talking earlier about stereotyping in terms of kind of going, that's got us to this point. Now we need to get to the point of kind of going, actually, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't have to be traumatic in order for it to be impactful. You know, people who are underrepresented live their day-to-day lives just like everybody else, and they have joys and they have sadnesses, and we should be saying, should be doing that. You know, there's very few pieces of content where I've seen, particularly from an LGBT perspective, where it's not based around trauma. You know, it's like It's a Sin in the UK was huge, and it was a fantastic piece of content, but it was purely trauma-based. You know, and actually a lot of my queer friends and LGBT friends were like, I don't want to watch it. I've seen so much of this. Yes, it's fantastic, but it's the same thing over again. I think the only thing that's really had quite a lot of impact in terms of queer joy has been Schitt's Creek, and actually had a really lovely, happy ending. And it just shows that it doesn't have to be disastrous in order for it to have an impact.
Yeah, so it's a lack of diversity in stories. We actually discussed this yesterday a little bit, where, I mean, we talked, I think our discussion showed a bit the need for standards, to not have it be up to an individual person and interpretation and so on. But Fatih already alluded to it, that it doesn't stop. Of course, it doesn't solve it. We will still need to apply critical thinking and effort, all of us. But so one effect is like where it's reduced to representation, and it's just, for example, about having LGBTQA stories, but there's no diversity within those stories. It's showing the same perspective over and over again, and it is oftentimes a perspective that confirms this mainstream gaze, view, and so on, and is like, oh, I know coming out is dramatic or whatever. I have this is what I know, and so this idea that it has to apply to that, and so it really makes me think that we've been talking about numbers, but in a different way, that diversity is a numbers game where there is no representation, because of course we as individual groups are also so diverse within each other, so that the goal is to give a lot of people access to filmmaking and storytelling, so that we will have a lot of stories.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think there's a question of critical mass. I used to be a commissioning editor, and can you imagine sitting, if you're at a broadcaster, regional broadcaster in Germany, you're doing one series on refugees, will you not be almost obliged to make it a problem series? Because otherwise, you'll say you're not taking refugees seriously, they have real problems if you make a sitcom. So I think the moment you say, okay, we have 5 series that have refugees in them, maybe not as main characters, then it will automatically happen. I don't think there's a mental blockade with people as such, but there's just a certain pressure to do certain things if the numbers are so small that there's no choice basically.
Yeah, and I think our goal isn't to make diversity initiatives that are better and better. Our goal is exactly this: it is actually about access, and actually achieving this this result where you have so many people that the different realities can exist, and so. And can I ask, since we're here together, which is great, about collaboration? Fatih, your organization supports collaboration, but also on this issue of standards, best practice, and so on, that the schools can profit from one another, that they can learn from one another, from their own best and worst case examples, but from also maybe pushing those standards together and having this, maybe possibly creating peer pressure of like, oh, all the others actually are including diversity as a criteria in research funding or something. We're looking bad if we don't do it, or now we understand why we should do it.
Yeah, I think collaboration is very important, especially also just presenting best practices, not only from film schools, but also I think from funding institutions as well. I mean, there are also funds which are, for example, in Belgium, as I'm aware of, they have a diversity coach when the script is already submitted, that they can basically rely on a diversity coach reading the script, if it's basically also with the language, if it's inclusive or not, and also other funds do that too. But I think also, I hope we will also open the question later to the audience. It would be just nice also to hear from the attendance here that various different challenges, but also maybe also best practices at certain schools or initiatives which they kind of open to get also, especially I think in the beginning we talked, and the example what Jakob presented is that the film schools are really lacking still of people who are basically coming from socioeconomic marginalized families, because in their kind of culture working in the arts is very, very utopic, because, I mean, I'm coming also from a similar background where basically engineer, doctor, lawyer, and that's it. Oh, information science, that's now the new thing. So that brings all money. I mean, I convinced my parents hardly still today that I went for the social sciences, and they still don't understand what I did. I think one just anecdote was that I actually invited once my parents to a lecture of mine, a seminar, and they were just my guests. And then my mom came afterward and said, okay, now I understand what you're doing. So, and I think this is also something with film, and with the arts, which I think we have to kind of embed to the families already or to the students even before applying to make it also kind of welcoming to them, but also basically to say it makes also sense if you can tell your stories. But then again, we need also best practices in that these stories are already kind of represented in the film on the screen, because if they don't basically see and actually the US does it very well with mainstream commercial franchises where they basically take now and have basically examples of black superheroes or black mermaid, and then and people are really identifying with that. And I think we have to find a middle ground how to also have these stories kind of told in order to motivate people.
Yeah, I think you gave us a good keyword. Thank you so much, you guys, so far for sharing all your trial and error stories. And I would like to open the question, but also the input to the audience. I'm sure I can also go around with the mic. If you put your hand up, you can also take a second to think about it. Are there any questions or anything you would like, maybe to share with the panel, with the room?
Favorite bit. So uncomfortable.
I'm not even, maybe that, but I'm not even uncomfortable, to be honest. I think it's fine. I know what's also to be sitting in the audience. I'm like, take a second. If not, I got more questions. Zero pressure.
I mean, whilst I think, just to what Fatih was saying, I don't editorial storytelling is what I'm known for in kind of my industries. And, I had to pull a student's film once before it even got shot because it was so absurd to me. And, my job as an editorial advisor, particularly in TV, was to question everything. Why is this happening? What have you done? What research have you done? And I had an East Asian student who was trying to tell a Muslim story, which fundamentally is not an issue. I just want to make that very clear. It's not. But the process and how you're bringing that narrative or that story is very important, of going, what research have you done? Who have you included to understand these things? Why are you telling this story? Because you have your own stories to tell, or you have other perspectives that you might feel more comfortable identifying. And I realized, sadly for the student, he just wanted to make something really, how do I say this politely, cliche and kind of impactful, because he thought, it's extremely dramatic. They only have 2.5 minutes, but it was a Muslim woman being beaten by her Muslim husband. And I said to him going, why? He's like, I think it's a really important story to be told. And I go, well, what's your experience with it? What do you know about it? Have you spoken to anyone? And he couldn't comfortably answer it. And so as a person who was in a position of power, I said, no, rather than allowing that to be filmed, because I think we have to make these kind of choices and decisions. And I then worked with the student to find out another way to do it. But that took a lot of hands-to-hand kind of work with them. But we need to be able to kind of go, why? And what's your thought process? And what's your research? And I think people are scared to do that.
Yeah, again, a quality issue. Like, what are our criteria for quality, and also of these? This often quoted by the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the danger of a single story, where it's like, yes, this is actually an important story to tell. But I've had this also in my life, because I also teach on anti-Muslim racism, and where people are like, yeah, but I want to help Muslim women. I'm like, yes, but it's like a certain number of Muslim women who are affected by issues like this. But it's like almost 100% of us who are affected by anti-Muslim racism. Mm-hmm. So why don't we have more stories on that? Like, so that's what I meant earlier. Oftentimes it's narratives that kind of confirm, in a way, or affirm this this established narrative. Have you guys thought about it? Huh? Yeah.
Thank you really for inspiring us already. For us, it's really informative and we learn a lot. And one thing that struck me very much was Jakob's film that you presented, being part of series. Now, if we're talking about collaboration and cooperation, I also thought about how much you're doing at European Film Academy in terms of the audiovisual sphere, ever more. in our perception. So I wondered if, for example, connecting the audiovisual dots, because I'm sure at London Film School there exists something like that, and to make a retrospective of these small films, of these small success stories, but put them really, while it's only a local principle, put them on the European scale could be something that could be very interesting, because of course we're talking about excess and we're discussing a lot about excess. So while not just taking in the experience of one country or one school especially, maybe there could be a retrospective and suddenly we would see a lot of that. Are you planning something in that sense of bringing like local success stories to the more European framework?
Yeah, I think it's, well, I'm planning actually for next year to have for sure digital events for our members. I mean, we have now 4,800 so far, which is kind of a lot, but still we need more.
4,800?
4,800 members. But pan-European.
I sounded a lot. I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, it sounds a lot, but if we look, if we see the geographical diversity we have, because we represent also countries like Georgia, Azerbaijan, and also Israel and Palestine as well. So it's still like few, especially if we compare to the academic American Academy, right? So, but still, I think what we want to do is a culmination or kind of best practices or representations, but also especially, I think when we talk about diversity inclusion, there's always mostly the angle lately, and I think it has something to do with Black Lives Matter as well. It's mostly on race and ethnicity, and it's coming from the US and also from the UK more to continental Europe. But I feel especially we have to also look on other representations, and that's why I really want to do also kind of like let's say an overview of these different diversities which we have, and we are now opening also in our board a seat for transnational ethnic linguistic communities, mostly the Sami people, but also Roma. So we have also this aspect of indigenous, which also exists in Europe, right? But mostly it's associated to the US or Canada. So, and which is also, I think, important, but then also to, when it comes to queer stories, queer representations as well. So I think in that sense, we want also more dissect or kind of deconstruct in a way diversity inclusion, and not only because I feel like the people are just overwhelmed with when we talk about diversity inclusion as a broad. And I think if we have basically what you mentioned, Christoph, basically like also more examples of different success stories, or even like, and I mean, if we talk with, and obviously these success stories would be then benefit for us if those success stories at one end also will be a part of our membership. So we would then have also a more diverse membership in order to basically have a diverse board, and then also have diverse films represented represent on the European scale.
Hi. So there's a Monaco-based non-governmental organization called IEFTA. It's International Emerging Film Talent Association. And they actually, what they do, they bring talents. And so they empower filmmakers and bring them to festivals. And they work a lot with refugees. And you were just mentioning refugees. But did you come up with also project initiatives at your schools? We are mentioning elite school. I see a little bit controversial because elite means like mostly so you certain groups. So maybe we have to be very careful with the terms we are choosing. So but I would like to know in general if you come up with some initiatives for the refugees.
From ours, We deal mainly with talent development and not final films, obviously. I don't think we have a specific. Obviously, we have students who have refugee background, but we don't have a specific initiative. Something we are working on is because we often overlook what Fatih is saying. The minorities just around the corner, and in Denmark's case, it's Greenland and the Faroe Islands, which are. I mean, they are part of the Danish realm, but they have actually not been able to get support from the Danish Film Institute. A very curious or absurd situation.
Can I ask, is this a colonial situation?
Yes, it's a very colonial situation that is by most Danes not acknowledged as a colonial situation. We see it as we were the benefactors. There's an issue of who came first to Greenland, or maybe the Vikings came before them, and so on. So we don't really, I mean, we had slaves in the West Indies, and we know that that's a colonial situation. With Greenland, it's a very tricky issue. So we have been part of that. Also, we're doing an initiative on that, because that is focused on acknowledging talent from these two countries. And actually, there's a revolution happening now in the Faroe Island film production. There have been major series shot there and so on. But it's taking a long time. But it's interesting how, and we know that if you make a film that's from the Faroe Islands, it will get into festivals, even if it's a fairly shitty film, because it's the first, more or less, from the Faroe Islands. So there's an added attraction. Then when you're on your 10th or 20th film, you have to deliver in terms of quality. So I think, but you were also talking a bit about initiatives and how they have a tendency to disappear after a while, that you can do something and then
I'm quite anti initiatives. I've seen them. I've run many myself, so I will put my hands up to it. I've seen how destructive and how performative they can be. I think initiatives in the concept of it is a great idea, but there's no through.
I'm sorry, can you just tell me what do you mean when you say initiative?
So I think if we're trying to get funding for marginalized group to make content, or trying to get more people of color or queer people in, whether also if there's a gender imbalance going, we're actually only going to fund X amount to female filmmakers, and then we don't really look at the intersectionality of that as well. Going, are they black female makers? Are they queer female makers? Are they disabled? But from my experience, and maybe this is a particularly UK thing, and please forgive me if I'm wrong here, is that it's great. Here's the money. Go do it. Okay, bye. And that's kind of what happens. And there's no kind of going, okay, well, how do we develop you further? What projects are we going to bring you onto next? What's the kind of storyline or narrative that you can kind of help embed within for me at the time, I was working at broadcasters, and it was very tokenistic, and that's the honesty of it. And that's why I can be quite anti-initiatives, because I don't think they have the through thought that they need to have. There's no, I've got a lot of, particularly when I used to be head of the Black Network, because also no one from our kind of staffing who was black wanted to run it. So I ended up doing it. So I created initiatives to create black filmmakers, and we got funding for it. We ring-fenced it. All of them got to make great products and make great content, and then they were just lost after that, because it was the only thing that they got. And particularly those who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they don't have the funding or the finance to continue that project on or to do more. Whereas I think that's why I think it can be, I call it the illusion technique. So look how great we are. Look what we're doing. We're doing such a good job. We're definitely getting representation. But actually, the systemic structure is still the same. They're still not getting access. They're still not getting opportunity. If that was the case, I've been part of several initiatives over the last 10 years, and diversity shouldn't be this deep of a conversation still if they were doing the job that they were meant to be doing. So I'm always a bit like, as soon as I hear the term initiative, my back goes up and I'm a bit like, oh.
So is this maybe also a resource thing, because initiative is limited, right? So it's limited time and project funds allocated and stuff. And so usually film schools, I don't know about excellent film schools, But
You're really taking on the
sorry, just joking. No, I'm just saying. But usually schools, they're like, oh, we're low on funds. We're not like major corporation or something. We're low. We have limited funds, and so like, oh, we want to do something, but we have limited funds, and so we do something limited, like an initiative. And of course, the alternative would be like to do massive change on structure, but then that would be much more.
And it's to the point that I think we spoke about it earlier.
Yeah.
It's kind of going, who's given that perspective and narrative? Because if it's not being done in a certain way, it's not being seen as good enough. So rather than empowering our filmmakers to kind of go, tell us what you want and we'll help create that, particularly when I've worked for major broadcasters, they've worked with minority groups, but they're kind of going, but we still want it to feed to our major audiences. So they're not really telling the stories that they want to do. They're telling a watered down version so that it's more palatable. And I always find that really interesting because I'm going, why, if we are going to do trauma, let's do trauma. Let's do it, like, let's go gung-ho. Let's go absolutely to the wall. But they're kind of going, no, it's too much. Our audiences can't take it. And I'm going, well, that's their experience. That's what they're trying to bring across. We should be telling them to do that. But it's being monitored, I think is probably the best way to do it.
I'm just trying to, just one question. I'm trying to understand, like, from this funding perspective, what is the alternative to initiatives?
For me, it's strategic through lines. So, okay, if we're going to say we want, let's say, some black filmmakers, great. What tools, what kind of accessibility, what resources are we giving to them? And what does that look like in 5 years' time? Not just the 5 months that they're going to be on this initiative. Because, you know, are we giving them access to directors? Are we putting them on our books? You know, and kind of going, oh, I've got this great, fine, it's a pilot TV show that's coming up, but we'd love to come you as the director or the producer on it so that they're getting that experience. But when they're going, they've done the great initiative, they've created a great, okay, let's say great, in very quotation marks, films or content, and then they'll go and get a job and they're like, sorry, you're not experienced enough. We don't want you here. Or actually we need more. And then they don't have that funding to do that. That needs to be a lot more strategically thought out about kind of going, if I want to do an initiative now, I have to have a 3-year plan. So the first 6 months, you're learning, you're educating yourself, you're getting the skills. The second 6 months, you're getting onto a project, you're learning all those experience, hands-on experience. You're learning how to deal with different people. Because let's face it, it's dealing with different people. That's the really hard part in a production. It's not necessarily the skills that they bring. And then kind of going, okay, well, here's your 1-year project. And then on the 3rd year, we're going to have this pilot that we're going to do. You're going to take the lead on that. You'll get the support. But there's a lot more thought that's put into it. There's a lot more support that's put into it.
So,
but it's a limited strategy. And that's my point. It's kind of going, I think for me, initiatives are a maximum, and this is me being extremely graceful, is a year. And and most initiatives that I've seen have been 3 months or 6 months. And then they've kind of been going, well, good luck. I think that's a great opportunity for them. And actually a lot of those individuals do look at it as a great opportunity because they're getting to do something that they've never been able to do before. But then that's why we also have a massive issue with retention in the industry. More and more people of colour are leaving the industry because they're not getting the access. More and more queer people are not being able to tell their stories because it's not traumatic enough. You know, more and more women are being told that they need to do things in a certain way. So it's, you know, and that's what I mean. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just think that there needs to be a lot more thought and funding and research and things to put in it to make sure that there's longevity in it. And I think we don't have that in the UK, definitely. I mean, yeah, and I've worked with MIPCOM too, and I know exactly what they're like. But I don't disagree. I just don't necessarily like it, if I'm being honest. But I think there could be a lot more that could be done in order to make sure that they're not moments. And that's my issue. Initiatives are moments. They need to be every single day ongoing.
And the question is also there, I mean, what stories from Africa are basically then represented from the streamers? I mean, again, I think I understand your frustration with initiatives, and I'm really agreeing also that it's mostly very much tokenistic. I feel there should be some rooms or networking, like where you meet with key decision makers already from the beginning of a process even if it meets the festivals or what you have, just that programmers know about you already before, you know, what's your aesthetic and so on, and in general. But I feel also then, even if it's tokenistic, also the communities are very hard to reach because there's a lot of frustration. I mean, there's a lot of frustration applying to film schools. I have a lot of friends. I encountered a lot of people from marginalized positions in the last 1.5 years in this industry. They are not applying to any gatekeeping kind of initiatives because they know that they are not, or that's their assumption, that they don't get accepted. So there's a kind of, it's like an electoral, if you're frustrated with the politics, you don't go for votings anymore. So for elections, and it's the same like this. They try still to survive in this, maybe to do it also in a very unconventional, intersectional way, maybe to still bring their stories to life, but it's very hard and they know it as well. So we have to find also a tool to reach these people to basically make them not anymore frustrated enough from these initiatives because still they see that certain stories are just supported and funded. As you mentioned, it's trauma, it's a certain narrative, and some narratives work. I mean, and some narratives also do it, even if it's conventional, it's still like, oh yeah, it's working, it's good. And we see it also in the film landscape now, but still I think that it's a step by step and it's a slow process. So we have to kind of not momentize, but maybe basically really kind of put it again more to the standardizations that it's basically relevant today.
I think we all agree that change is happening. If you look at our panel, Fatih, me, and Dee were all 3 people who were hired specifically to work on these issues of diversity and inclusion, and we're being paid for it, so there's funding. My position is limited, so I'm a bit of an initiative, but who knows? that might change.
It's the same for me.
Let's stop hating on the initiatives. Some initiatives are trying their best, okay? But I mean, this is what we're trying to look at today in our talk, not only about change happening, but how we can really make that change impactful and also sustainable, so that that is the keyword, sustainable, I think, also around the initiatives, that after an initiative ends or a member of staff leaves, whether they're working with diversity or it's just a person in power, that we know that these changes will keep going and give more access and create more stories. So at this point, I would like you guys all for being here and sharing for us. Thank you guys all here for being here and sharing your time with us. I hope everybody in the room leaves with something helpful. And see you around soon, hopefully.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.